The Magyar Bow. No fully intact ancient Magyar bows have been recovered from burials and cemeteries in the Eurasian steppe. However, their rough shape could be discerned from thin bone plates, which were used in the construction of the bow as a means of adding rigidity and strength to the handle as well as the siyas. The bow itself, being composed of organic material, had decomposed, yet the horn plates, which reinforced the tips and the handles of the bow, had survived relatively intact. These horn plates on the Magyar bow gave archaeologists and military historians the means to discern the shape of the infamous weapon. What do we know about Magyar bows? Károly Sebastian first proposed the idea that these bone plates had in fact been used to stiffen and reinforce the ears and handle of ancient Magyar bows. After this discovery, it became obvious that the Hungarian bow was an Asian reflex bow. Sebastian tried to define the exact form of the bow, which was difficult, since at this period no drawings of the graves were made. Therefore, the original position of the plates was not known. The first reconstructions had to be patterned after Asian bows still in use at that time. Sebastian's writings caught the attention of the Hungarian sociologist Fabian Gyula, who became fascinated by the Magyar bow and decided to build a working replica. After building several, he found that the best material for the core of the bow was maple. He used deer sinews for the backing, horn of the Hungarian grey cattle for the belly, and deer antler for the bone plates. Most of his results supported the reconstruction of Sebastian. The only difference between their reconstructions was the form of the unstrung bow. Fabian built a less reflexed bow. This reduces the risk of limb twist but also the efficiency of the bow. Magyar bows in the present day. With the advent of the reenacting movement in Hungary in the early 1990s, a rapidly growing demographic of modern Hungarian society generated interest in the weapons of the ancient Magyars. Many of these people are deeply attracted to the idea of the powerful Magyar bow, weapon of the ancestors, creating identity through triumphant history. This gave birth to the revival of horseback archery, bow making, and archery in general. As a result, the Magyar bow became one of the most important symbols of national pride and commitment. Today, many independent enthusiasts and manufacturers create Magyar bows of all sorts. Some stick to traditional materials, and others have used modern substances such as fiberglass to make bows of ancient Magyar design, but with the ruggedness and reliability of new materials. Traditional bow construction. Pieces of wood spliced together in sections comprise the core of the bow. Glue from animal sources such as fish bladders hold together the different layers. Humidity and moisture can weaken the adhesive used to bind the various layers of material together. Great care must be taken to keep the bow dry. The ancient Magyars most likely would not have enjoyed hunting or fighting in the heavy rain. Sinew, horn, and other important components were used in the construction of Magyar bows. Horn from cattle, similar to the Hungarian grey, would be added to the belly of the bow, and finally layers of sinew were added to the back of the bow. A sheath of bark or leather would finally be wrapped around the bow to form the finished product. The Hungarian Bow Foundation outlines the parameters which establish a bow as a true Hungarian or Magyar bow. Only such bows may be called a Hungarian bow which were either based on an actual 9th to 11th century bow remnant, or which was fabricated based on the stated description of a 9th to 11th century Hungarian bow. The bow is built with non-contact ears, without string bridges, on the siyas. The ears and the grip are typically stiffened with plates. The plates of the bow should typically be fabricated of red deer antler. The total length of the bow, measured on the belly side, is no more than 1500 millimeters, the distance between the ear tips unstrung. The minimal length of the grip plate is 100 millimeters, but no more than 200 millimeters. The angle of the grip is no more than 180 degrees. When the bow is strung, the angle of the ears is no more than 45 degrees. The width of the limbs is no more than 45 millimeters. The string of the bow should be made of natural material. For coating, protecting the bow, only natural material should be used, example birch bark, leather. The structural elements of the bow shall not contain artificial materials, example synthetic glue. Now for some background on the ancient Magyars. Where did the Magyars come from? Magyar is what people of Hungarian ancestry call themselves. The modern country is called Hungary in English because the Huns, under Attila, used the plains of Hungary as their base of operations. The Magyars belonged to a confederacy of nomadic tribes similar to that of the Huns. They rode into Europe to raid and pillage, before eventually settling in present-day Hungary, converting to Christianity and adopting the feudal structures of Western Europe. The connection between the Huns and the Magyars is noted in the myth the Magyars used to explain their origins. It is called the legend of the White Stag, or the legend of the miraculous stag. Many thousands of years ago, somewhere in Central Asia, there was a great empire whose ruler was the giant Nimrod. He had twin sons named Hunor and Magor. The former would become the ancestor of the Huns and the latter of the Magyars. One day, Nimrod's sons were on a hunt, when they caught sight of a wondrous stag, shining and glittering. The brothers gave chase, and the stag led them westwards, across vast lands, eventually reaching a scenic and bountiful country. The stag then vanished into a lake, and the twins were very saddened by its disappearance. They requested their father to build a temple near the site where the stag was last spotted. The brothers lived in the temple and eventually explored the surrounding area. While surveying the countryside one morning, they heard the sound of enchanting music playing, and after following the sounds to the source, they beheld two maidens bathing in a stream, who the two warriors took as brides. The Huns would become the descendants of Hunor and the Magyars of Magor. The Blood Oath. Magyars were part of the last great pagan migrations and invasions of Western Europe, and they arrived in their new homeland in the 9th century AD as a loose confederacy of 7 tribes. Arpad, who could trace his lineage to that of Attila centuries earlier, was chosen as their leader. The leaders of all 7 tribes had cut themselves, allowing their blood to collect and mix in a vessel from which they all drank. This pact was known as the Blood Oath, which bound the fate of the tribes together for all time. The raiding and pillaging of the Magyar tribes in Western Europe enticed the Byzantine emperor to pay them a yearly tribute. The Byzantine Emperor Leo the Wise had earlier used Magyar horsemen as mercenaries against the Bulgars in the War of 894 to 896. The Magyars, like the Huns and Scythians before them, had grown wealthy from war. The military tactics employed by the Magyar tribes were similar to that of all Eurasian nomads. Long-range arrow, showering, feigned retreats, ambush, and surprise attacks. Their blacksmiths manufactured their slightly curved sabers, but their main weapon was their recurved bone-reinforced Magyar bows.